Hey, just thought I'd start a touch early. I think that we've got everything sorted out now with the tech issues. I think that for me, I just have to rely on the old computer, and we've got everything set up in our bar area. So these are exciting. These are exciting days for me. I look forward to it every week. I get to dress for work and get out of the comfy clothes. And I'm pretty sure that my feet have not seen a pair of dress shoes in 3 months. So they're getting quite used to sandals these days with this nice weather that we have coming up. So I hope you've had a good week so far. Welcome to Wednesday and Hump Day, and that you've enjoyed a few beers throughout your week, and that you'll enjoy a few more as we get going as well. Dan and Chantal have already piped in. We're just going to give it a few minutes until we get a whole bunch of people, because I think they're expecting everything at 7 o'clock. I've got a pretty good session planned for today. I think that you're really going to like it, and we've got some good things planned for next week as well. So I'm kind of looking forward to it. And I heard through the grapevine, talking to a few other people. Hello, Annie. Talking to a few other people these days, and I think a lot of people have talked about this in the past, that the beer industry has hit a little bit of a lull. And, we hit our peak in Canada, what seems to be our peak in Canada, probably close to 5-10 years ago. And then we've been gradually drinking a little bit less, but that's a global thing as well. Last year, I have all the data, and it's showing that we dropped a little bit again. Total alcohol sales are down as well, but it's going to be really fascinating to wait until the end of this year to find out what really happened, because in odd times, we tend to drink a little bit more. And even though people can't go out these days and enjoy a really nice place where they can sit down and have a great meal served to them, we're going out and we're having those beers brought in to us, either through curbside delivery or drop-offs that some of the craft brewers are doing, or we're going to the beer store, the LCBO, or the grocery stores. Harold's here. Many choices in the cellars for today. He's got Westmalle, Asheville, Chimay Red, Rochefort. Oh, you're going with the Westmalle? Good, because I have a little chat about Westmalle. So that's good. Harold's quite the Belgian beer aficionado and has a cellar that he's invited me to. At some point, I'm hoping that we're going to get that opportunity. So I think we're almost at 7 o'clock and people are starting to slowly pipe in. I'm going to show you two different pouring methods today. And the other thing that you should take note of is on our Prud'homme Beer Certification YouTube channel, we've got a multitude of different videos. There's a series called The Publican Diaries that they shot at Publican House in Peterborough when I was there doing some staff training. So we've split that all. Hey, Keith. And then I've got a whole bunch of instructional videos as well. So how to pour draft properly, how to pour Guinness properly, how to do Belgian pours, how to change a keg and a fob. There's a whole bunch of content on there, and I'm going to gradually add a little bit more over the next little while. The good thing about the last few months is it's given me also the time and the opportunity to think about how I'm going to make Prud'homme Beer Certification better. And as much as it is built for classroom, I know that the online formats are going to be very important as we move forward. And so it's giving me a chance to revamp everything that I'm doing. I've already started revamping level 1 online and level 2, and they're going to look more like classroom formats where we're going to do webinars and tastings. And had a really nice chat with some of my instructors last week, and I'm going to start working on bringing level 3 into the online format. That's going to take a little bit more time and effort and a lot more thought, because it's very, very highly sensory oriented. Hello, Craig. And so I'm really excited about that. And then on top of that, I was chatting with my provider for my online services, and we're going to revamp how Prud'homme looks online and make it a little bit more functional. Hello, Wes. And by that, what that means is I'm going to be able to add a whole bunch of functionality into the online programs that will actually provide opportunities for people to just feed off of the next course that's coming up or the next class that's coming up. Hello, Brian and Rebecca as well. Got the whole family here now, which is nice. And people that I've had in my classes before and haven't seen in a long time. So this is giving us all a chance to reacquaint with one another. What else can I tell you? I had a nice chat with Ted Mraz from the beer store today. He is a good friend. And I have a lot of respect for how he does business in a very, very strenuous environment. And despite an article that was published in the Toronto Star a little while ago calling for the demise of the beer store, it seems that that was a bit false and misquoted. Beer store is having a banner year, lots of sales this year, and looks like things are on the up and up. And I'm still very, very hopeful that this is all going to leave us, hopefully, societally in a better position. But we'll get back to it at some point. But the good thing is that we can still sit and enjoy beer with one another, and whether it's in our own homes or whether it's through YouTube or other venues, I think it's a great opportunity for us to all sit and chat. Even though I would love to have a personal chat, I'll take the messages that you're sending as well. So where else can we go? So today, I welcome you back to the Style Sessions, and today we're going to deal with Belgian Dubbels. And I've got one that I'm going to taste, and if you've had a chance to buy it, then great, you can taste along. And if you've got other ones like Harold or a few other people have, that's cool as well. So I'm going to talk about Chimay Red Cap or Premiere, which is what it's known as, and then we're going to talk about the Dubbel style that comes from Belgium, which is really one of my favorite styles. It's extremely complex. It's just wonderful to taste and sip. Oh, Kraz, hello. I'm sure Deb's with you as well, which is really nice. So one of my favorite styles, and again, I absolutely adore Belgian brewers and what they do. And we're going to talk a little bit about the Trappist Appellation. So it is a designation that is held by 12 breweries around the world, and it's really quite unique. So I think I'm going to get started, if you don't mind. So Annie, I know that you're going to come down and get your beer in a second, but this is Chimay Premiere or Red Cap. In Ontario, it's really only available in the 750 ml format. In other provinces, you can get it in a much smaller format, a bottle like that size as well. So these are really unique and interesting beers. And I found out the other day that the Manitoba Liquor Commission basically dumped a whole bunch of Belgian beers, which to me is sacrilege because they were probably past their date code. But these beers, when you look on the back, their date codes tell you they typically last for about 5 years. And this one will last until November of 2023. But to be perfectly honest, they'll last 10, 15, 20 years if you cellar them properly. So there's two ways to pour these. We have a more modern way, which I'm going to show you right now on a 750 ml. And then we have a more traditional way, which I'm going to show you in a second. So the modern way was shown to me by Jerry Vietz, who's the brewmaster at Unibrew. And they do this with all their 750 ml bottles as well. But what they do, and especially if you're sharing this bottle, this is the way to do it. So what you would normally do is, with the modern way, is you're going to tilt it on about a 45-degree angle. And you'll see that this has a cork and a cage on it as well. This is a very, very lively beer, so you have to be careful. I've almost poked out a few eyes in my classes from time to time. So it's on a 45-degree angle. And then we're going to very, very slowly rotate it. And by rotating it, what I have in here is an air pocket. And the air pocket's actually washing off the yeast. So these beers typically are always re-fermented. And I'll go into re-fermentation in a little while when we all have a beer and we can sit back and listen. So what I'm doing is I'm washing the yeast off the bottom and I'm allowing it to become active in the rest of the beer. So this is the modern way of doing it. This is also good if you're doing tastings with other people. instead of doing it the more traditional way, because on a 750 ml bottle, you do have to be a little bit more careful. So I always keep my hand over this because of the issues I've had in the past where I get too busy talking and not paying attention, and then the cork comes out and almost rips somebody's eye out. So it comes out with a little bit of a twist, and it's really good to have a glass handy because it'll come out pretty quickly, and it makes a really nice pop. And then we're going to take it and we're going to pour it very gently into Anne's glass. So I do have a Chimay glass here. I have a few of those. Oh yeah, Anne's telling me I have to turn the logo. So Anne's my marketing person. So we get a really nice foam on there, and then we've got this beautiful glass of beer that I'll describe a little bit. And Anne, my love, here's your beer.
Oh, thank you. Hello, everyone.
All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pour the rest in line, and I've made note to keep the logo facing forward. So interesting beer for the most part. Let me help you with the style first. So Belgian Dubbels are typically reddish brown in color, and they're more on the mahogany cherry wood kind of color. They should be, if you poured it the way I did, will be quite murky. So very, very opaque and cloudy. And that's because of the yeast that's active inside. Now the yeast does multiple different things when we talk about fermentation, but it creates quite a bit of CO2. And so you can see here, I've got this really nice big head on the top. When you smell this beer, and this has been at my cellar temperature for quite a while, and so it's about 15 degrees Celsius right now, which is perfect for it. But when you put your nose into this big, wide open mouth chalice, you get lots of really cool aromas, lots of red fruits, dark fruits. You could get anywhere from raisins to dates, figs, a little bit of banana bread, almost oldish banana, not fresh banana, a little bit of spice, almost on the clove note, and almost like Moroccan spice, if you will. This beer is fantastic with Moroccan food. And when you taste it, it's really effervescent, it's really sparkly. And that's the extra CO2 that's in there. And is quite smooth. It doesn't really have very much bitterness to it, because in Belgium, hops play a supportive role. They're not really the master of the domain. Malt is, and the yeast is. And so you get a little bit more of those darker fruits in there. You might get a little bit more vanilla, some cinnamon, nutmeg, those kind of spice notes. A great beer to have with game food as well, so game meat. And it's just such a wonderfully complex beer. It's robust. It's pretty easy to drink. And again, you know, this is one of those deceptive beers. And at 7% alcohol by volume, it can hit you pretty quick if you're not careful. So what we do is we take our time and we sip and enjoy. So what I'd like to do now is show you the more traditional way, because someone commented on my pouring methods and said, that's not the way the Belgians do it. And granted, maybe it isn't. But we live in modern times and things have to adapt and change no matter what. So what I'd like to do now is show you the more traditional way of pouring. So I'm using another Belgian brown ale. This is from Saint-Feuillem because I didn't have a small one. But we really want to take a little bit of time on this and pour it as well. So you can see it wants to come out very easily. So we're going to just be gentle, because in the traditional Belgian way, we want to be careful not to arouse the yeast. So in this manner, hospitality in Belgium dictates that you should allow the guest to decide whether they want the sediment in there as well. So we keep pouring, we're very gentle, we've got a really nice clear beer, and then I've got all the sediment sitting on the bottom of my glass. So what we do then is we take a shot glass and we pour the sediment into the glass. And typically in the Belgian brasserie, what you do is you leave the empty bottle on the table and then you present the glass and the sediment so that the consumer or the drinker can enjoy it and pour it in if they choose to. Some people like it without. I'm not one of those people. I think that these re-fermented beers are re-fermented for a purpose, and that yeast brings depth and flavor and body. And for me, it softens it, because when you're drinking a beer like this, without the yeast, it tends to be a lot sharper. And we want to enjoy these beers and make them softer to drink. So now I have two. What a conundrum. All right, so I've poured mine in because I'm not a believer that the yeast should be separate. So now that you have your beer and you can sit and enjoy, why don't we just go back a little bit in time and talk about where this style came from and why its naming convention is so important. So a lot of people get really confused because they think in Belgium you have these things called singles, doubles, triples, and quadruples. And there was some confusion at one point thinking that they were double the strength or triple the strength or quadruple the strength. If you have beer in each hand, you can't touch your face. Stay safe. That's excellent. Yeah, but I talk with my hands, so that's a big issue for me, is to have two beers, because then I get spilly. So people thought it was double, triple, or quadruple the strength, and that's simply not true. The other thing that a lot of people thought is this went back into medieval times when people were illiterate, and it was 1x, 2x, 3x, 4x to show the strength of the beers. And even though that's a nice thought, it's not accurate, because most of these new styles were created in more modern times. So let me take you back. The Dubbel name was first coined by the Westmalle Monastery in 1856. And in 1856, the brothers of the Westmalle Monastery started producing a higher alcohol brown ale. And they called it Dubbel because it was much stronger. So it was a double hit, if you will. What we know now is typically the way that we hit these high alcohol contents on these styles of beer is by adding more fermentable sugars. So if you will, there's double the fermentable sugars in there. The Belgians typically use Belgian candy sugar, and that is beet sugar, and it's really crystallized, and it brings up the alcohol content ever so slightly. So we can thank the Westmalle monks for creating the style name Dubbel, and didn't really come to any popularity until the 1950s. And then most Belgian brewers who are making these higher strength brown ales refer to them as Dubbels. So that's really the standard. Yeah, if you can find Unibrew's Maudit, it is also, in my eyes, a world-class Dubbel, but there are lots in the marketplace these days. Westmalle is simply fantastic as well. Now, to go to Chimay, Chimay is located in Scourmont, which is in the west side of Belgium, and there's an abbey there, and they have been brewing beer since 1862. The abbey was erected shortly before that, but been brewing beer since 1862. And Chimay is the largest of the 12 Trappist monasteries. They make three different styles, 4 styles actually. So they make the red, which is their lowest at 7%. Then they make a white cap, which is also known as 5-5, and it is a Belgian triple. And the quad is the Chimay Blue. And you can find the triple and the blue in the LCBOs typically as well. They also make what they call a Pater's beer. And Pater's beer means father's beer. So this is a beer brewed at lower alcohol percentage that is given to the fathers for their daily nourishment and consumption. Such a shame, right? Like they have to drink beer as part of their religious fervor. Just gets better all the time. Okay, so we've got Chimay, and we've talked a little bit about Westmalle. Let's talk a little bit about re-fermentation, and then I'll talk about the Trappist Appellation as well. So re-fermentation is a secondary fermentation that occurs in the bottle or in the brewery. In some cases, it's in the brewery, but in this case, it's in the bottle. And Chimay goes through a secondary fermentation for 3 weeks. So they go through all the processes that we would do in modern brewing, And then they ferment a second time. So once the beer is aged, probably about a week, then what they do is they add a little bit of yeast back into the bottle with a little bit more of the wort, which is the liquid pre-beer. And then they cap it, seal it, and store it at warm temperatures for about 3 weeks. And then we get it. So re-fermentation is really interesting. It can be called bottle conditioning, secondary fermentation, but it's really about adding a little bit more yeast. And you might ask why that's important. Well, it's important for multiple reasons. One is it creates more refreshing characteristics in the beer. So it creates more CO2 because that's what yeast creates. It creates slightly higher alcohol as well, which is nice, but it's not a huge effect on this. But the biggest thing for me is that yeast consumes oxygen. And there's always a little bit of oxygen in beer. And the more oxygen is in beer, the shorter the lifespan of it. So when they go through secondary fermentation, really what's happening is they're consuming all of the oxygen in this beer, which is why it lasts so long. It's such a wonderful concept. You know, it's just nature. And we don't really have to add any preservatives or anything. This beer just gets better and better and better. Now, if you want to age this beer, or any beer for that matter, two major things for me. One is higher alcohol content and re-fermentation. You take the beer and you put it in a cool, dry place, a cellar, a closet, somewhere where it's not refrigerated, upright. It's not like wine. We don't lay them down. We don't want any contact with the cork. It'll come out nicely. And they get much softer, more complex as they age. It's really kind of a cool thing. And I have another one to look forward to as well. All right, let's move on to the Trappist Appellation. So an appellation is a protected designation. It's rich and vibrant in the wine world. So think about champagne. You can't call anything champagne unless it comes from Champagne, France, or it's been aged as a champenoise. So it's constantly turned and it's got yeast in it. So that's one thing. And there are multiple different appellations in the wine world. In the beer world, there aren't very many. But the Trappist organization basically came to light in the 1960s. And to understand where the Trappists came from, you have to go back into history. So Trappists are traditionally Cistercian monks. And the Cistercians are a more strict observance side of the Benedictine monks, which started the whole monastic movement. Well, the Cistercians were evicted out of France and Belgium and had to settle in a small town called La Trappe in Holland or the Netherlands. And so these monks, as they rebuilt their monasteries, became known as Trappist monks. And the Trappist appellation is one that was, as I said, started in the 1960s. It's grown slowly. There are 12 now, and there are strict rules to be able to use the Trappist symbol on there. Wes, got a 4-year-old Premiere. Very nice. I almost forgot where I was, but so some of the things that you can really focus on with why a Trappist is a Trappist and not an abbey like we visited last week is this beer must be brewed in the monastery walls. It has to be brewed either by a monk or under supervision of a monk. Now, in the cases where the monks don't do any physical labor, they hire a brewmaster. And one of the interesting tangents off of this is one of the original brewmasters at Chimay in the 1980s is a fellow named Paul Arnott. And Paul was recruited by Unibrew to come over and brew their beers. That's why Unibrew is so fantastic. Bess, am I violating some monastic rules by drinking Chimay from an Orval goblet? No, not at all. It's got a big smiley face there. Drink it out of any goblet that you like. The Orval goblet's very nice as well. And the monks would just appreciate if you love their beer. All right, so brewed in the monastery walls by a monk or under supervision of a monk. And the last part of it is that these monasteries are not meant to be profit-making ventures. They're meant to be community service, the way that their sect has dictated that to them. So any of the money that comes from the sale of these beers basically goes back into the community, or it goes back to repair the monastery or the brewery itself and isn't used to make any money at all. So that gives you a little bit of a tour of Belgian Dubbels and the Trappist Appellation. And so now I'm just going to open it up if anybody has any questions while you're enjoying your beer, because I certainly am. Nothing yet. Next week, I'm going to continue my tour of Belgium, and we're going to take a look at triples next week. And the one that I'm going to use is going to be La Trappe Triple. The monastery is called Koningshoven, and it is the largest of all the Trappist breweries, and it's in the Netherlands. So we're going to have some fun with that. Yeah, thank you, Annie. Annie's giving me little suggestions from her place above. So I will also send out a notice coming up as to which beer I'm actually going to do. Sabir just got in. Is it accurate to say that Belgian singles and triples are similar in flavor and doubles and quads as well? That's very well remembered. So the interesting thing about these designations, single, double, triple, quad, is that singles and triples are golden in color and doubles and quads are brownish red in color. And for all of my research, I haven't been able to figure out why. A lot of it just has to do with who the brewery is. Westmalle was also responsible for creating the triple style. So they made a lighter colored Belgian beer, high alcohol. So they then called it a triple. Craig's got a question about cellaring. My cellar's under the stairs. It's a concrete floor and does a good job. Stouts and Belgians. When it's quite warm, it reaches 17 to 18 degrees. Is that okay? It absolutely is okay. My cellar is concrete as well, and it gets almost too cold in the winter. So what I typically do is I move it into another place in the basement. So I used to have a shelf or a cupboard where I could actually put it into. And that's where I kept it. And then in the spring, I move everything back into the cellar because it maintains that 17, 18 degrees. And that's a perfect temperature for those beers. Dan asks, are triples and quads re-fermented again or just higher in alcohol? That's a really, really good question. So some are re-fermented and others are not. To give you an example, and Dan, this will apply to you very much, but Delirium Tremens, in my eyes, is a Belgian triple. It is not re-fermented, but it is high alcohol and it's blonde in color. It fits into that category. It has the same flavor profiles, but the brewers at Delirium never felt that they needed to put yeast into the package, into the bottle. It goes through 3 fermentations, though. So it actually gets re-fermented in the brewery. It just doesn't get re-fermented in the bottle itself. So it really depends on the actual brewer and what their intent is and what their belief is. And some are a little bit more traditional than others. Deauville is another one. Good example of, it's labeled as a Belgian strong ale. But if you really look at it and you look at the nuances and the aromatics and the flavors, it really is a triple. It just doesn't have a lot of active yeast. It's bottle conditioned, so it still has something in there, but it's not as cloudy as any of these. And quads, again, same thing. Even Saint Bernardus App 12 is a wonderful quadruple. We're not really going to get to quadruples because I figure that might not be good on a Wednesday night for most people because we'll hit 9, 10, 11, 12% alcohol by volume. And after next week, we'll go back to Germany, and we'll start looking at more German styles like Schwarzbiers and Dunkels. Thus, Chimay fermentation happening in the bottle. If so, why isn't the Chimay bottle a champagne bottle with the indentation at the bottom? Well, small indentation, but not the same kind of bottle as a champagne bottle. And I think that champagne bottle has more to do with as it's laying down. So champagne is laid down like this when it's being conditioned. And then as they're turning it, it's constantly going. But when you get champagne in a finished state, there's no yeast in there at all. So so this particular beer, the Chimay, all the Chimays, go through a primary fermentation in the brewery, and then a secondary and sometimes third fermentation in the bottle itself. Anything else that I can help you with right now? One day we'll all get together and enjoy these in person. But in the meantime, we'll do this. All right. Thank you, Brian. I think I'm going to wrap it up. I think we've covered a lot today. We've had some really nice beers, and we've talked a little bit about style, bottle conditions, same as re-fermented. Correct, Craig. Also secondary fermentation, re-fermentation. Sometimes you will you'll read on a bottle, especially if it's coming from Belgium or Quebec. So a lot of the Unibrew beers are like this, but they say en lise. And that is typically something that you'll see with wines as well. En lise is simply having the yeast still in the package itself, so in the bottle. So all good. And the other thing about being re-fermented is the yeast has lots of B12 vitamins, which is very, very good for all of us as we get older. So any of you young people watching may not apply, but it's always good to stay healthy. But B12 in re-fermented beers, extremely good for us to stay healthy. So stay well. I'll see you next week.